As I was preparing my homily, I was reflecting upon the end of the year. It's the end of the school year, being at the parishes and with college students as well. And so there are perhaps some here who are graduating high school or 8th grade, and maybe there are some confirmation students. We have our parish confirmation this Tuesday. And in the midst of that being a time of joy, I couldn't shake from myself a little bit of a sense of sorrow or sadness in terms of me being a priest, because for the great majority of at least the middle school and high school students who are a part of our parish school or confirmation program, it will be the last time that they come to church for a long time, statistically anyways. 80% of them will leave the faith probably immediately after their confirmation. And it's just the way it is. It doesn't need to be the way it is, but it is the way it is now. And it sort of weighs on me a little bit, maybe for a couple of reasons. As a priest, I think to myself, what am I not doing? Or what are we not doing? And I don't know if there's a great answer for that. There's a lot of little answers, but also in terms of our gospel, because what that speaks to me is there, for whatever reason, whether it's the church's fault or a family's fault or some other society's fault or just the individual's fault, there's a lot of people that don't understand friendship with God. And they think of their faith as, I'm not exactly sure what, maybe just a list of do's and don'ts, maybe just a way of being an activist of sorts or something, maybe just a good philosophy. And none of those, all of those are good things, but none of those are faith. None of those hold you close to God. And so I was just sort of sifting through that a little bit in my mind. But I want to hold on to that last one, is what does it mean then to be a friend with God? And I want to speak about it in terms of two ways. The first is that we know the sorrows of God. And those are summed up for us on the cross, but we have a share in them. And the second is that we know the joys of the Lord, and that those perhaps could be found summed up in the resurrection and the gift of the Holy Spirit. And friends of God know those two things in a particular way. I like to think about it in terms of an analogy, though. Imagine, let's say you're building a house, and let's pretend that you're a young married couple, and your first child is on the way, and you're moving out of an apartment in the city into some dream home or wherever you're going to go, and you're preparing for your family's future. And you hire an electrician to come in. And the electrician comes in and sees just empty studs, doesn't see like a house or a home, just a frame of a house. And he shows up and he does his job. He puts the wiring in all the rooms, and maybe things go really well and it's done quickly and he feels good about it, and he goes home, spends time with his family. Or maybe it goes poorly. There's little problems here and there and he's frustrated, but he just gets more money then because he gets paid by the hour, and that's fine for him. And you think of the difference between that worker. There's nothing wrong with being a worker. We have to have workers. Hopefully many of you are workers in that way. But the difference between that hired worker who has no connection to the life that's going to fill that house and the family that will move in. And you think of perhaps the mother of this imaginary child, soon to be, as she looks into the rooms that the electrician just sees, just one more room in his day, and she sees a place where she'll lay down her child at night. And, the outlets will provide light and sound and safety and security. You think of the yard, perhaps. The electrician's wiring the floodlights in the yard, and maybe you think of the father as he imagines playing with his son or daughter in the lawn, catch, or just chasing people around, or whatever dreams this family might have for whatever unknown future is there. And you see a little bit of the difference in our gospel between what Jesus says is a friend of God who knows what the master is doing, who knows the greatness of the plan, who knows the potential for it to go wrong, who knows the joy when it goes well. And in this gospel, the slave, or elsewhere in the gospel, Jesus talks about a hired servant or a hireling or whatever it might be, who has no connection with the life of the owner of whatever property this is. To be a friend of God is to know the heart of God, and not just to be going about doing all the stuff you're supposed to do. I don't know if you see the difference, but it's a key difference. And you see that played out in at least these two ways, the sorrows of the Lord. And so you think of knowing people's potential, and then knowing when they don't fulfill it. You think of knowing what great things might lie in store for people, and then see them getting bogged down in a life of carelessness and sin. And there's a certain sorrow that only comes with knowing what could have been in store for that person. I think of Mother's Day, my brother's wedding. It was a weird thing. The day of his wedding, my mom was getting ready, and she called me, and I can't remember what she wanted to talk about, but she started crying on the phone. I was like, Mom, why are you crying? It's like a wedding day. And she said, and I didn't understand, I really don't understand it still, but she said something like this. She said, I never understood what the Blessed Mother felt like at the foot of the cross until the day of this wedding. I was like, Mom, what's wrong with you? Come on, But is there something in there? It was something like she saw in marrying away her son, giving her son away in marriage, she was letting go of him. And that only someone who loved, had given their heart to this person, we'd say in friendship or in motherhood is deeper than just friendship, could have known the depths of that particular sorrow. So we actually say that the Blessed Mother at the foot of the cross knew more sorrow than anyone else who had ever lived, other than the Lord himself. So we have a devotion to Our Lady of Sorrows. Her feast day is September 15th. So there's this depth of sadness that you know when you are a friend with God, which you might seem like, oh, they're not really selling me on friendship with God here, Father. But actually, believe it or not, you know this, we're going to have sorrow no matter what we do in life. And the difference is this sorrow that comes with friendship of God is not despair, because you know the plan. You know where it's going. And this is where it's tied in with the joy of friendship. So Jesus says in our gospel, I have told you this so that my joy may be in you and your joy might be complete. Joy is not complete unless it is found also in a sorrow that does not lead to despair, but it is also not complete unless it also is filled with the joy of what could happen and what will happen. And this is the joy of being able to walk with someone and to see them grow, to see them live, to see them flourish. And this is the joy that the Father has in watching you. I don't know if you ever think about God is happy with you. You ever think about that? God likes you. If some people, you say that, they're like, huh? God likes me? God not only is delighted in you, is thrilled with you. You're not a mistake in God's eyes, even if you've made a lot of mistakes, because all the while He knows what He has yet in front of you. And He walks you along the way. And you think again, like perhaps a mother who sees their child fall, but then knows that they're going to pick them right up and that they're going to be okay. And there's a certain joy that you cannot know unless you know the heart of God, unless you know the plan of God, unless you are going to live in the house of God. Like this analogy of an electrician. He might know the joy of putting the lights in, but he's not going to know the joy of seeing a family grow in that space. Unless you are a friend of God, your sorrows won't be deep enough to really give us true meaning in life, but your joys won't be great enough to really have true meaning and joy in life. And even if the only joy that we may have in particular relationships with people as a friend of God is the joy of being at a funeral and knowing that heaven is a real place, If that's the only joy you have in a particular aspect of your life, praise God. Because it's better to know that than to think that we just disappear into oblivion. I was recently last week with a woman at our parish after Mass. She's lost a couple of her loved ones in the last year. And I said, "How are you?" She said, "Well, in between the tears, I'm doing well, I'm doing good." And then she said, "But our goal in life is to go to heaven. And so I've 2 down, 3 to go, I'm doing pretty good." And I laughed, it's like kind of, at first glance, you're like, oh, it's kind of despairing, isn't it? And yet, no, it's not. If we all could say that, say our joy is in life, and so I can see even what would be the greatest tragedy, because I have friendship with God in the midst of the sorrow, as she said, I know that God is with me. If you can know that, then everything is yours. If the greatest of sorrow is a path for joy, then you have nothing to lose. That is at the heart, at the essence of friendship with God. Maybe the last thing then is to put this into your hands. There are probably some of you here, just like in our school, in our church, and everywhere we go, but probably some of you even here in the pews who are not friends with God. You feel of yourself just a servant of God, or as Jesus would say, slave of God, or just sort of a nobody and a nothing, and God really isn't concerned with you, and you don't share your own heart with God. You see it in families sometimes, siblings or parents or child and parent relationship, or husband and wife, where people live with each other as though they're just roommates, or they're just co-workers or whatever. And they don't share their heart with one another. And you've probably seen that, and you've seen how empty that is. But that same aspect is true with, I would be willing to bet, some of us here sitting in the church. That you think of God as just a boss or a roommate or something like that, but not someone you share your heart with. And so the challenge, which is, as I said, it's in your hands, the Lord gives it to you, is do you share your heart with God? Maybe give you an examination of conscience here. If in the last week, or I'll give you a month, in the last month, have you shared your heart with God? If something good has happened, do you share that with the Lord like He's a person right in front of you, because He is? Have you said, "Praise you, Lord, because you've given me this joy"? Or the flip side, have you faced a sorrow, a moment of despair, of anger, whatever it might be, and in that moment said, "Lord, I hate this. Walk with me. Take this from me. Be with me. Know my sorrow. Know my sin." There's probably some of you here who do that, but there's probably some of you who don't. And if you don't, then you don't know the depths of meaning and joy to be found in the Christian life. And so I'll offer you a challenge. If today, especially, but throughout this week and the coming times ahead, pray. Speak to God. Share with Him your heart. That is the beginning of friendship with God. It overflows into action, as our gospel says. We lay down our lives for our friends, but we don't lay down our lives for people who we don't know. And so my challenge for you today is to begin, at least, if you haven't, to share your hopes, your dreams, your fears, your joys, your sufferings, your sorrows, and your sin with the Lord as a friend. And if you do that, I promise you, and you do that not just one time, like, see what happens if I try this, but you really live into that. Day after day, you have a life of friendship. This phrase will begin to become true in your life, that the joy of the Lord will be in us, and that our joy would be complete.